This week in Linux, the Linux kernel has some more drama to talk about, but this time it's related to international sanctions of all things. We've also got some new hardware announcements from System76 and the Raspberry Pi, plus we've got new Libra software fund that has been launched to help financially assist some open source projects. All of this and more on This Week in Linux, your weekly news show that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world. So let's jump right into your source for Linux good news. Let's start off the show with some drama, shall we? The Linux kernel has delisted some maintainers who happen to be from Russia. So there's a lot to this topic. We're not going to be able to cover everything. So if you want to check out the links in the description and the show notes, there's going to be a lot of them. So feel free to check that out for the full details. But there is a lot, so let's get to it. Linux 6.12 RC4 kernel update. This was a patch that was merged to remove about a dozen maintainers from the maintainers file. Greg Crow-Hartman, or Greg KH, his comment says that the patch was sent basically to remove some entries due to various compliance requirements. They can come back in the future if sufficient documentation is provided. Now, most of the maintainers removed are linked to Russia, many using the .ru email addresses. And speculation on this has been about, at first there was no comment. We actually got an update today that provides a lot more context, so we'll get to that in a bit. But at first people were confused about what the compliance requirements meant. And they're like, what exactly did that mean? But we all thought it was likely linked to the sanctions on Russia, and it has been confirmed today that that is the case. So what's the impact here? Well, the drivers themselves remain in the kernel, including those from Russian hardware like Baikal CPUs. I'm not sure how you say that. It's unclear if the patches from these maintainers will be accepted in the future, and it's also unclear if the stuff that they've already sent will be removed. So far right now, it is planning for the stuff that they've already submitted to not be removed, but at some point that could be changing. We don't really know right now for all of these different details. But we did get an update from Linus Torvalds himself about this, so let's check out the quote. So Linus comments saying, and I quote, "Okay, lots of Russian trolls out and about. It's entirely clear why the change was done. It's not getting reverted, and using multiple random anonymous accounts to try to grassroot it by Russian troll factories isn't going to change anything. And FYI, for the actual innocent bystanders who aren't troll farm accounts, the various compliance requirements are not just a US thing. If you haven't heard of Russian sanctions yet, you should try to read some news someday. And by news, I don't mean Russian state-sponsored spam." Again, this is Linus's quote. He goes on to say, "As to sending me a revert patch, please use whatever mush you call brains. I'm Finnish. Did you think that I'd be supporting Russian aggression? Apparently, it's not just lack of real news, it's lack of history knowledge too." Linus. So this is a fairly classic Linus message. Actually, it's kind of subdued in a way, if you think about it. They are confirming that it is based on sanctions, and people were wanting more information about these sanctions and what these compliance requirements are and what the documentation they need to supply and that sort of stuff would be. So it goes on to be a response of saying, someone asking if Linus was under a NDA, any sort of NDA about this. And his response to that was, Linus says, "No, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to go into details that I and other maintainers were told by lawyers. I'm also not going to start discussing legal issues with random internet people who I seriously suspect are paid actors and or have been riled up by them." Linus. So we do know for sure that it is related to the sanctions, but we also got a follow-up after this just today as the recording for more information. Phoronix is reporting that there are some updates. We have a comment from one of the affected or impacted Russian Linux developers, Sergey Semin. I think that's how you say it. He's left basically a blog post that was like a goodbye message to the Linux kernel community, and there's a lot of details. You can look in that if you want to. He has done a lot of stuff related to Russia's Baikal hardware, as well as some kernel drivers, controller drivers, and various media drivers as well. So he then finishes off with his mailing list post with saying, hope we'll meet someday in more pleasant circumstances and drink a couple of beers together. But it's now time to say goodbye, so sorry for the long text. I wish good luck on your Linux way. So the way he left is actually, or he's leaving is respectable. So that's a shame that he's having to leave in this kind of circumstance. But what exactly is the reason for this is we do get some details about that. So James Bottomley responded to that particular thread by saying, please accept all of our apologies for the way this was handled. A summary of the legal advice the kernel is operating under is, if your company is on the US OFAC SDN list, subject to an OFAC sanctions program, or owned/controlled by a company on the list, our ability to collaborate with you will be subject to restrictions, and you cannot be in the maintainer's file. Anyone who wishes to can look at the list here, and he provides a link, which I'll have in the show notes. In your specific case, the problem is your employer is on that list. If there has been a mistake and your employer isn't on the list, that's the documentation Greg is looking for. I would also like to thank you for all your past contributions, and if you or anyone else would like an entry in the credit file, I'm happy to shepherd it for you if you send me what you'd like. Again, we're really sorry it's come to this, but all of the Linux infrastructure and a lot of its maintainers are in the US, and we can't ignore the requirements of US law. We are hoping that this action alone will be sufficient to satisfy the U.S. Treasury Department in charge of sanctions, and we won't also have to remove any existing patches. Regards, James Bottomley. There was another follow-up message that recognizes the delay and talks about the delay. So he says that, James says that a big chunk of the reason it's taking so long just to get the above is that the lawyers, of which I'm not one, are still discussing the specifics and will produce a much longer policy document later. So they don't want to be drawn into questions like this. However, my non-legal advice rule of thumb that I'm applying until I hear otherwise is not on the SDN list, not a problem. James. Phoronix is also reporting that longtime Linux developer and extended file system maintainer Ted So, I think that's how you say it, has also provided some clarity on a separate mailing list thread in response to suggested patch removing Huawei from the maintainer's file, giving their known relations to Chinese government. Ted commented saying that, note that there are multiple sanction regimes and exactly what the rules are vary from country to country. At least in the US, there are exemptions that mean that I can accept patches and send code reviews or engineers from Huawei so long as they occur in a public forum, such as the LKML mailing list, Linux kernel mailing list. As a result, folks who have noticed that there are extended 4 patches from Huawei, and I personally consider them very valuable contributors to the extended 4 community. The exemptions may not apply in different countries and for different sanctioned entities. I will note that China is not currently attacking Taiwan militarily at the moment, while Russian missiles and drones, and some of which might be using embedded Linux controllers, are actively attacking another country as we speak, so it might not be surprising that the rules might be different for different sanctioned entities. He also goes on to say quite a bit more. He says, finally, please remember that kernel developers don't make the rules. Those laws are made by US, European, Japanese, and other governments. My personal priorities are to make sure that I don't run afoul of any local civil or criminal penalties and to make sure that other Linux developers can also stay safe. That being said, I'm not a lawyer, and so please don't take anything I say as legal advice. What I'm comfortable doing as the extended 4 maintainer living in the US might not be applicable for someone else who might have different circumstances. So, for example, it could very much be the case that other countries have stricter laws, and if you are acting as a maintainer in terms of accepting people's code or providing design guidance, which may be considered providing technical assistance in some countries, if you are uncertain, please reach out to a lawyer, Ted. He also says that, P.S., this has always been the case, even before one country invaded another. Maintainers take on real legal responsibilities as part of their work. It's just that consequences of copyright and patent issues are much less than when there are sanctions involving countries who are actively at war with others. End quote. So my opinion on this is that I don't have one. I'm not going to be sharing an opinion. Sometimes I will share opinions on topics in this show, but in this particular case, this is way above my pay grade, so I don't really have an opinion to give. But I will say that it kind of makes sense in terms of like there's legal ramifications if they don't do this kind of thing, potentially. Like there could be, maybe not necessarily there is like someone telling them they have to do this, but there could be. And if it is that like potentially like criminal actions, that's a hard decision to make. So I don't know. I don't necessarily like this decision or anything because, you know, the free and openness aspects, but I also get it. It kind of makes sense in their perspective. And I feel like people using this as a way to attack them is just silly because, yeah, it's a bummer for those who are affected by it. And hopefully those people can be pulled back in later once everything is taken care of. But I kind of get where they're coming from. Even whether I like it or not, I kind of get it. Raspberry Pi has announced some accessories for the Raspberry Pi 5, and they are pretty compelling. They have announced official Raspberry Pi SD cards and SSDs. And one of the best things about the Raspberry Pi 5 is that it supports SSDs, but there has been a question for some people, which one would you work with the best? Like, which one is the best one for the Raspberry Pi 5? And I guess now the answer is to get theirs. Get the official Raspberry Pi SSD. The Raspberry Pi SSD also has an SSD kit that's available, so you can get not only just the SSD, you can also get a M.2 HAT Plus for the kit that you can use. And let's talk about these specs. So you get two different versions. You can get the 256 gigabyte version or the 512 gigabyte version. So the 256 gig drive will be $30. And if you want the kit with it, it's an additional $10 for $40. And the same thing is true with the additional kit being $10 more than for the 512 gig. But that one starts at $45 and then goes to $55 with the kit. You're also going to get some pretty good performance. So you have 40,000 IOPS and 70,000 IOPS respectively. You can buy the 256 gig SSD right now. But if you want to get the 512 one, there will be a little bit of a delay as those will be pre-orders and they're going to be shipping by the end of November. They also have some Raspberry Pi SD cards, and this comes with a high-quality, low-cost SD card with the Class A2 performance. And they also have this being developed by Longsys. This is the partner that they're working with to provide better random read-write throughput on all the Raspberry Pi models. They say that it's optimized for the Raspberry Pi 5, so that's good to hear. And they say that it supports command queuing, enabling faster performance overall. And as you can see, there is a lot more to this particular topic. So I'll have links in the show notes for you to check out more details about the SD cards if you would like to, because there is a lot. There's also the Raspberry Pi bumper, which is kind of like a case, but not. You can check that out with the links in the show notes. System76 have announced a new piece of hardware to their lineup, and this time it's an ARM-powered desktop called the Thelio Astra. So the target audience of this is developers working on autonomous vehicles, or AVs, and ADAS systems, which are advanced driver assistance systems, and software-defined vehicle development, or SDV. The specifications of this particular piece of hardware is that the processor has a 128-core Ampere Ultra ARC64 or ARM64 CPU that has 3.0 gigahertz clock speed. The graphics is an NVIDIA RTX 6080A GPU, and the memory is up to 512 gigs of 8-channel DDR4 3200 megahertz ECC RAM, and the storage can be supported up to 8 terabytes of PCIe 4.0 M.2 NVMe's. So what makes this interesting is they're making it specifically for people who are developing autonomous cars technology and driving technology. And one of the things they say is a key benefit for this is that the ARM emulation is not there. You don't have to worry about that. It runs an ARM A64 CPU and NVIDIA GPU natively. They also say it has efficient cooling engineered to prevent thermal throttling during heavy workloads. And it is also cost-effective performance, they say more powerful and cheaper than cloud-based CPU instances. They also are offering, I'm not sure exactly what they mean by this, but they said lifetime in-house support from System76. So lifetime of the machine, lifetime of the person who ordered it, I don't know. So they're saying it provides end-to-end native testing for automotive industry software, running dozens of virtual ECUs and thousands of unit tests directly on the desktop. And it is also going to be available for pre-order around with the general availability starting around November 12th of this year. You can do the pre-order now, but they're saying that the GA will be November 12th. You can get it installed with Ubuntu 22.04 LTS or Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. They don't necessarily mention Pop! OS. I assume that's because of the fact that Pop! OS is still in development stage pretty heavily on Cosmic, and there's a lot more to do that. So that makes sense if that's the case. This is a really interesting piece of hardware because I was not expecting the System76 to release a desktop that's ARM powered or really anything ARM powered for the foreseeable future. So it's very curious to see like how this performs. They did not send me one to try out, and I'm a little bummed by that. I also understand because I'm not really a hardware guy in the first place, and I wouldn't know what I'm doing with this, especially with the autonomous driving development. I have nothing to do with that. So maybe that's why. But if you're watching System76, I want to play with it. The AlmaLinux project has introduced a new addition called Kitten, which will serve as the direct upstream for AlmaLinux OS and is the primary point for the AlmaLinux community to engage and influence the future of the AlmaLinux OS. It's not intended for production use. This first release is based on CentOS Stream 10 source, which will eventually be the basis for Red Hat Enterprise Linux or RHEL 10 later on. So why are they making this? They say because we anticipated many changes in 10, we wanted to get a head start on building AlmaLinux OS 10. Earlier this year, we started setting up infrastructure in the build pipeline for AlmaLinux OS 10 and started testing using CentOS Stream 10's code. Based on the preparation work, we are excited to share that we have successfully built a preview of AlmaLinux OS 10 that we are calling AlmaLinux OS Kitten 10. Now, real quick, just as a side note, I'm a little disappointed that AlmaLinux OS Kitten does not have a kitten mascot, like a little 2D mascot character that is a kitten. Just a little, it's okay, just a little disappointed, just a little. So how is AlmaLinux OS Kitten different from CentOS Stream? They say, first, this is not AlmaLinux Stream. CentOS Stream is a product of the CentOS community. It is an ultimate destination of the CentOS community's work. AlmaLinux OS Kitten is not a product at all. It is meant as a vehicle along the journey of development for the next version of AlmaLinux. We are using our freedom here to do a bunch of work in preparation of AlmaLinux OS 10. Below you'll find a big list of differences on our wiki where you can find the full release notes for AlmaLinux OS Kitten 10. Now there are a lot of things to cover on all the differences, so we're not going to cover everything, but one of the big ones are re-enabling frame pointers. So RHEL and CentOS Stream disabled frame pointers by default, but with AlmaLinux OS Kitten 10, they are re-enabling them. This enables system-wide real-time tracing and profiling for optimizing the performance of any workload running AlmaLinux, as they say. They're also doing some stuff with Secure Boot. So Trusted Boot has been long been required by bare metal devices and is becoming more and more popular in virtualized environments. AlmaLinux OS Kitten 10 supports Secure Boot for Intel, AMD, and ARM platforms. They've also made some changes for Firefox and Thunderbird because they're going to be shipping RPM packages for both of those, whereas RHEL will be shipping Flatpak versions coming in RHEL 10. So AlmaLinux 10 or AlmaLinux OS Kitten 10/10 will have RPM packages for Firefox and Thunderbird, and there will be Flatpak versions for the RHEL edition. There are also many other changes, and we'll have those linked in the show notes for anyone who'd like to learn more about AlmaLinux OS Kitten 10. And again, we need a mascot that's a kitten. Just saying. Last week, we talked about the Sovereign Tech Fund and how they are contributing to open source. This week, we have a new fund to tell you about that wants to do the same thing. The FLOSS Fund has been announced by the CTO of Zerata. I think that's how you say it. Zerata says that they are the largest stockbroker in India. So the FLOSS Fund is going to be giving $1 million a year to free and open source projects. They say that the FLOSS Fund is dedicated to supporting critical, impactful, and valuable free/Libra and open source projects globally. They say they're giving up to $1 million per year to support developers and communities that create and maintain projects big and small. They say they are excited to announce the launch of a dedicated fund aimed at providing financial assistance to FLOSS projects globally with an annual commitment of $1 million. He says that this has been in the works for quite some time in Zerota, and they have been developing financial technology products and services built on an ever-growing FLOSS stack. And without the high-quality FLOSS projects that they have been using freely and used to build their organization, products, and services, they would not be able to exist as they do at this point. And a significant portion of their success and growth is owed to FLOSS, encompassing everything from programming languages to operating systems, to databases, web servers, front-end frameworks, productivity tools, code editors, and absolutely everything. I like the way that they're just acknowledging how much of an impact it is, and they're doing something about it, which is just fantastic. I love to see it. They're not necessarily a tech company, but they're wanting to support the tech of open source projects because it benefits them so much, which is awesome. This is something that I think every company that uses open source in some level of magnitude should absolutely be doing themselves as well. They say it goes without saying that it holds true for nearly every technology company founded in the last decade, whether it's publicly acknowledged or not. That's even more true. So yes, 100% agreed. There's a lot more to this blog post, but they say, I wanted to cover the motivation sections. They say, what are the motivations behind the fun? On a personal level, it is common sense, goodwill, and reciprocity, the spirit of FLOSS. From a for-profit enterprise perspective, terms like goodwill and reciprocity are notoriously problematic and most likely fundamentally incompatible with their very nature. But that is a separate philosophical debate altogether. Setting philosophies aside, it makes perfect logical sense for a business that relies on FLOSS to support it directly or indirectly when they freely tap into a global ecosystem of unlimited FLOSS innovation. So ultimately, their motivations are that they want to exercise their goodwill and reciprocity on a personal level as FLOSS hackers. By the way, they're using the term hacker as a person who likes to mess with things, not in the negative sense that people use that term for breaking stuff or breaking into things. They probably shouldn't use that term because that term, yes, technically in the free software movement, it does mean that, but also, so the term hacker is kind of already been adopted to something else. And just think about it. They want to exercise their organizational business sense and strategically help the FLOSS ecosystem thrive, which is awesome. They want to encourage and apply a bit of peer pressure on other businesses to step up structured financial support for FLOSS programs, which would be awesome. So good job. Contribute to existing FLOSS funding models into sustainability conversations and debates. And yes, I like what this is doing. I hope it helps various projects, and I hope it does convince other companies to want to do it as well, because I mean, it's only going to benefit them more. If you're contributing financially to a project you depend on, then it's going to help those projects help you in the long run. So it just makes the logical sense. So this is great to see. And yeah, if you'd like to learn more, links in the show notes. There's a new version of the Solus Linux distribution with Solus 4.6. This is a refresh release, but it is bringing a lot of changes, such as desktop environment updates, kernel enhancements, and increased hardware support. They also have a lot of backend stuff being changed, like the file system structure and also experimental software centers. So let's check it out. So they have updates to Firefox with the latest version, Thunderbird, LibreOffice as well, and many more. And also they have done some improvements for the out-of-the-box support for video playback, which is great. And they've also been doing some stuff with the file system related to user merge. So they've been tackling a conundrum about user merge. And this is basically because Systemd kind of requires this sort of thing in order to work properly. And also Fedora is doing stuff similar as well. User merge brings Solus in line with the compatibility efforts being spearheaded by Fedora and other distributions. More urgently, Systemd requires the file system be merged for version 255. Additionally, the user merge is a necessary condition for Solus to adopt Serpent tooling in the future. For those who don't know, Serpent OS is what they're referring to, and Serpent OS is being made by the same people who make Solus. Now, originally, Solus was actually founded by the people who started Serpent, but then left the project, then came back to make Serpent OS, and then later on decided to come back to Solus after there was some changing of the guard and that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit complicated, but there's a lot more to it. Let me know if you would like a more detailed history version of this distribution in the comments. They've also been doing some stuff for the software center. So they have an experimental software center work that they're doing. They still continue to ship the Solus software center as the graphical package manager, but they are looking at developing other stuff, having experimental support for GNOME software and KDE Discover included in their repositories. They say that these software centers let users update software distributed by the Solus repositories as before and install and manage Flatpaks for third-party packages, such as the FlatHub, and the FlatHub is configured as a remote for Flatpak by default. So this version of Solus is going to be shipped with the Linux kernel 6.10.13, and also if you want to use an LTS kernel, you have the option for 6.6.54. They're also no longer including the AppArmor patches. They talked about this in a prior blog post. I'll have that linked in the show notes. But this is related to snap support, basically. So snaps are still technically supported, but more in a partial confinement rather than a strict confinement. And this is due to the way that snaps work in terms of security functionality and confinements. Because if you're using it on Ubuntu, you have the full ability for confinement. But if you're using it on other distributions, not exactly. There's a little bit of differences depending on how they use AppArmor. And in this case, Solus is deciding to remove the full support of snaps in favor of a more simple maintenance system. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it. If you'd like to learn more, I'll have a link in the show notes. But if you are not familiar, Solus is also the original project for the Budgie desktop. Now, the Budgie desktop has been split into its own project, but Solus was the first one. So, of course, they have Budgie as an option. They also have an edition for GNOME, KDE Plasma, and XFCE. So, links in the show notes. The Clementine music player is back after a pretty long hiatus. So it's back after 8 years since the last stable release in 2016, which is 1.3.1. This new release is tagged as 1.4.1, though it is not considered an official stable release, but rather a rolling release. I don't think I've ever seen like an application use a rolling release. I've seen definitely distros do that, but I think this might be the first app I've seen do this. And this is interesting because there's a lot of changes in this release. The key updates for 1.4.1 would include the removal of defunct web services that have definitely been for a while. And also, there have been a lot of performance enhancements, such as Block Analyzer has been rewritten. And also, there's some updated plugins included, as well as some changes to Qt 5. And also there's new features such as a search filter on the playlist page, a scrollable icon sidebar with the mouse wheel, and also the option to hide sidebar via the tools menu, and many, many more. Speaking of the Qt 5 thing, yes, Qt 6 is the current version of Qt, but this is a pretty old application, so not having a release since 8 years ago, there's quite a lot to do. So they have to port it to Qt 5 and then port it again to Qt 6 whenever that happens. So there's a lot of behind the scenes updates happening prior to this release, but this is the first real release of a Clementine. And for those who are not familiar, this is a music player that is inspired by Amarok and also has been forked by Strawberry. So for those who don't know, Strawberry is a very similar music player, and I'm pretty sure it's not inspired by Clementine, but like how Clementine is technically not forked of Amarok, they call it inspired, and I think that Strawberry is a fork of Clementine, but I could be wrong about that. If you'd like to check out this new version of the Clementine music player, you'll have a link in show notes with the article that OMG Ubuntu covered. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show and want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the open source and Linux world, then be sure to subscribe. And of course, remember to like that smash button. If you'd like to support the show and the Tux Digital Network, then consider becoming a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/membership, where you can get a bunch of cool perks like access to the patron-only sections of our Discord server and so much more, including access to join me in the Skybox and the patron-only post show after the live streams. That's right, we're streaming the show again, so you can do that and join me every week on Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, US. And you can go to thisweekinlinux.com/live to watch the show, or tuxdigital.com/live to get the time zone converted into your time zone. So there you go. Do that, And you can watch the show for free live, but you can also join me in the patron-only post-show by becoming a member or a patron in tuxdigital.com/membership. You can also support the show by ordering the Linux Everywhere t-shirt or the This Week in Linux shirt at tuxdigital.com/store. Plus, while you're there, check out all the other cool stuff we have like hats, mugs, hoodies, stickers, and so much more at tuxdigital.com/store. I'll see you next time for another episode of your source for Linux news. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell. I hope you're doing swell. Be sure to ring that notification bell. And until next time, I bid you farewell.